That LLC you just set up to protect your rental property, it's not a shield. It's a detailed roadmap for an aggressive lawyer to strip your assets clean. Most real estate investors are living inside a dangerous comfort zone. You spend months finding the right property, you negotiate the deal, you secure the financing, and then you do what everyone on social media tells you to do. You set up a single LLC. You pay your state's filing fee. You get a piece of clean paper back from the Secretary of State, and you breathe a sigh of relief. You think you've built a fortress. But in actuality, if you have placed your rental property, your commercial building, your daily operations, and your bank accounts all inside that single LLC, you haven't built a fortress. You've built a bomb. And you're sitting right on the fuse. The internet has lied to you about what an LLC actually does. It tells you that the LLC itself is the protection. It's not. An LLC is simply an empty container. It's a lock on a door. But if you leave the windows open, the back door unbolted, and hand the keys to anyone walking by, the lock on the front door doesn't matter. So when everything sits inside one LLC, you've created a single point of failure. Think about what's happening inside that LLC. On one side, you have the value. That's the equity in the real estate, the property itself, the hard assets that took you years to accumulate. On the very same side, inside the exact same legal walls, you have the risk. Those are the tenants, the guests, the property managers, the daily contracts, the slips, the falls, and the maintenance disputes. You've placed the thing that makes money in the exact same room as the thing that exposes you to lawsuits. Risk and value should be separate, but by cramming everything into one container, your value is constantly held hostage by your risk. If a tenant sues the LLC today over an injury on the property, they aren't just suing for the cash flow of the month. They're suing the owner of the property. And because the property itself sits inside that exact same LLC, the entire building, all of its equity, and every dollar in that corporate bank account is sitting directly in harm's way. Today, we're going to look past the local filing requirements. We're going to expose exactly why your single LLC real estate structure is a paper curtain, how institutions actually look at your business, and the 4 universal pillars you must execute if you want your enterprise to survive real-world pressure. Let's talk about how the order actually breaks under pressure. When a crisis hits, whether it's a process server showing up at your door, an aggressive IRS audit, or a lender conducting due diligence, institutions don't care about your intentions. They don't care that you meant to keep things separate. They care about how you execute it. Because behavior leaves patterns. When a court or a regulator steps in to evaluate your business, they don't just look at your articles of organization and stop there. They perform a forensic audit on your daily behavioral patterns. They look at the trail of breadcrumbs that your operations leave behind over the past number of years. And the most common pattern they find among independent owners is a total chaos hidden behind the clean LLC. Let's look at the bank account. An LLC is only as real as the financial footprint attached to it. The moment money moves between your personal bank account and your real estate LLC account without a clear, documented business purpose, the legal protection of the LLC begins to dissolve. In the legal world, this is known as piercing the corporate veil. But let's strip away the textbook jargon and look at what it actually means for the owner. It means you're treating your company like a personal pocket. If you pay the property insurance out of your personal card because you forgot the business card at home, that sends a signal. If you deposit a tenant's rent check directly into your personal account because you needed to cover an immediate personal expense and figured you'd balance the books later, that sends a signal. If you mix business and personal expenses interchangeably, you're telling the outside world that the LLC isn't a separate legal person. You're telling them it's just an extension of you. And if you don't treat your business as a completely separate entity, why would a court of law treat it as one? When the pressure hits, an aggressive attorney isn't going to look at your LLC certificate hanging on the wall. They're going to demand 3 years of bank statements. They're going to trace every single dollar. And if those records show that you're still the financial center of the enterprise, they'll look right through the LLC. Your protection vanishes, and your personal assets, your home, your personal savings, your family security are suddenly on the line. So, to prevent your hard work from folding under stress, you have to transition from simple paperwork to true structural literacy. You have to design and run your real estate enterprise around 4 operational pillars. And these pillars don't care about geography or what state you filed in. They dictate what survives. Pillar number 1, separation of risk and value. As we established, putting your real estate assets in the same entity that interacts with tenants is a fatal flaw. True structural design dictates that your value live in a clean, quiet holding company, a separate entity that does absolutely zero business with the public. It signs no tenant leases, it hires no contractors, it faces no direct public risk. Meanwhile, your risk is isolated in a completely separate, distinct operating company. This operating LLC is the one that interacts with the public, handles the leases, and manages the daily chaos. It licenses or leases the property from the holding container. If the operating LLC takes a hit, the underlying real estate assets remain insulated in the quiet container, completely out of reach. Pillar number 2, the distinction between ownership and control. Owning 100% of the entity in your real estate LLC does not mean that you are the business. This is a massive blind spot for most independent owners. You have to learn to wear one hat at a time. If you're the sole member and the sole manager of your LLC, your daily behavior must reflect a strict division. Ownership is the right to the economic benefit or upside. Control is the formal, documented authority to bind the entity to obligations. So, every major decision, buying a property, opening a line of credit, entering into a major lease, it can't just happen in your head. It must be backed by formal corporate resolutions. If your paperwork reads like a personal diary instead of professional governance, the structure is going to fail. Ownership is not control. Pillar 3, allocation. Where does the money sit? Everything does not belong in one place. Every single entity you establish must have its own dedicated, uncompromised financial footprint. You can't move capital between your holding company, your operating company, and your personal accounts based on the excuse that we're all on the same team. If money moves from one container to another, it has to be cleanly categorized. It's either a formal loan with documented interest rates and repayment terms, or a formal distribution, or a structured intercompany payment, like a management fee. If the flow of money is undocumented, your legal protection dissolves under the slightest pressure. And pillar 4, authority. Who signs the contracts? Every single time a pen touches paper, liability is born. Critical point of failure occurs when you sign agreements without clear, documented authority from the specific entity you're claiming to represent. If you sign a commercial lease or a contractor agreement as John Doe instead of explicitly signing as John Doe, manager of Apex LLC, Delaware Limited Liability Company, you may have just inadvertently signed away your personal liability protection. Your signature blocks must be surgical. They must explicitly name the specific entity, jurisdiction of formation, and your exact corporate title. So how do we actually execute this? What does a literate structure look like for an owner who wants to protect their real estate and their legacy? Well, we build a 3-layer system, a systematic architecture that separates ownership, value, and risk entirely. At the foundation, we have the operating company. This is your public-facing shield. This entity handles the property management, collects the rent, deals with vendors, and signs the contracts. It owns no real estate, it has very little asset value, and it's designed to absorb the daily operating risk. Above that, we have the holding company. This is your quiet asset vault. The holding company holds the actual deed and ownership of the real estate. It doesn't talk to tenants. It doesn't hire lawn care companies. It simply holds the value. The operating company operates the property under a strict written management agreement or master lease with the holding company, moving the revenue cleanly and legally through documented intercompany channels. And at the absolute top of the architecture, holding the equity of the holding company, we place a structured trust. The trust acts as the ultimate anchor. asset insulation, governance, seamless generational continuity. It ensures that your ownership is structurally isolated from personal liability, completely removing your name from the public center of risk. When you arrange your enterprise this way, you're no longer relying on a single flimsy piece of paper from the state to save you. You're relying on an unbroken chain of operational discipline. If a crisis hits the operating company, the fuse burns out at the operational level. The holding company, the trust, and the underlying real estate remain entirely untouched. The brutal reality is that most real estate owners are running an accidental single point of failure right now. They bought the legal container, the LLC, but they left the operational chaos wide open. Your documents are already sending a signal to lenders, to the IRS, and to potential creditors. The only question is, what story are those records telling behind your back? If your documentation is a mess, the finest LLC in the world will not save the enterprise. The LLC is simply the lock. Your operational discipline is what keeps the door secure. Remember, structure determines what survives. So stop guessing where your liability ends and stop waiting for a crisis to test your architecture. You need to find the cracks in your structure before the pressure finds them for you. Right now, in the description of this video and pinned to the top comment, there's a link to the Structural Exposure Diagnostic. It takes less than 5 minutes to run. It will audit your daily behavioral patterns and analyze your operational footprint and show you exactly where your default gap is exposing your assets to total failure. So click the link in the description to run your complimentary structural exposure. If this gave you a different way to think about your structure, then like the video and subscribe, because most of what's out there is focused on formation, not what actually holds under review. And if you're already operating a business, then there's a free resource in the description called the Structural Exposure Check. It's a simple way to see whether your business is actually separate or just documented that way. And remember, structure isn't what you file. It's what survives under pressure.